the stage.
A number of years ago, a survey was conducted asking Christians about their views related to work. Statements made for people to respond to of their agreement or disagreement, you might say. The first statement was this: I can clearly see how the work that I am doing is serving God or a higher purpose. 30% said yes. The next statement: the work that I am doing is not as important as the work of a pastor or priest. Almost 80% of those surveyed agreed with this statement. The work I'm doing is not as important as a pastor or priest. For the amount of time that we spend working, friends, that's not very encouraging. That we would not see, the majority of people would not see their work as serving God or having a higher purpose, and that somebody else's work has an elevated status compared to what you do, which would imply that for some reason you're less with what you do. How would you respond to these statements? Can you clearly see how the work you do serves God and has a higher purpose? Do you see that it's just as important in God's eyes as a pastor or priest's work? Do you find your work to be meaningful, purposeful? In the past 2.5 years of doing my work of leading this organization, Circle City Fellows, where we come alongside adults to equip and empower to understand the integration of faith in the workplace, the vast majority, if not all, would fall into these categories. They come into our experience, and generally speaking, it's like, well, my work probably has maybe some meaning in this way, but I'm not sure that really makes it meaningful to God. It's just meaningful to, accomplishing this. Or I've sat with some, I had one clear memory of sitting with somebody who said, there's no way that what I do as a project manager could be nearly as important as my pastor on the weekend. And I would offer that I think God disagrees with that. What thoughts and feelings do you have about work? Are you TGIF, thank God it's Friday, or as I've also heard it said, TGIM, thank God it's Monday, and not because you just worked the weekend? Those of you that are already back from fall break, are you excited to go to work tomorrow? Now, I love vacation as much, if not more than anybody, so usually the answer is no for me because I just love vacation. But I also love what I do. So my invitation to you today is to see your work as God sees your work. See your work as God sees your work so that you might engage your work with passion and purpose. Now, last week I introduced this series, Your Work Matters, by walking us through the story of God's mission, reflecting on what is God's grand story that we read in the Scriptures, but actually is beyond even the Scriptures. It's the God from eternity past who is triune, giving, receiving, and sharing love, who creates out of the overflow of love, who carries love throughout this story as symbolized in this portrait here on the screen, and that will continue with a mission and purpose of love, of giving, receiving, and sharing of love for all eternity. And the idea is that we have a part to play in this mission. We have a verse to contribute. We have a paragraph to write in this story. That we find ourselves in that space between Acts and Revelation as part of the sent people of God into the world to live as Jesus lived and to love as Jesus loved. And when we do, we are participating in God's mission to put love where love is not. To see God put the world to rights, to participate with God in this way. And as such, we recognize that God's missional story, the story of God's mission, is God's compelling answer to who we are, what we are here for, and why our stories, including our work, matter. That our work, as part of our story of who we are, fits into this story, grand story of God. And we looked at how God has called us to be part of this story and God's mission. A missional call that impacts all of our lives. That we might see that, you might say in the concentric circles at the heart of it all, that God's call is on us to be a part of God's mission, and it is through our workplace for the sake of the flourishing of the city. So last week, God's call through his story to mission. This week, our work through our work. And next week, we'll look to what that means for us in the flourishing of the city. We want to make the connection today that God's call to us in his story is to understand that that is through our work where we spend the bulk of our time. If this work isn't seen as having a place in participation with God's mission, then friends, that's a problem. As followers of Jesus, we know our whole life is to be affected by this relationship, this discipleship of being a follower of Jesus, rather than a compartmentalization of our faith that is separate from our work. That when we work, we're doing work, but when we are with God's people in church or in a small group, then that's God's time. So again, my invitation is for us to see your work as God sees your work, so you might engage your work with the passion and purpose of its participation in God's mission. And to make that connection, I want to work through 3 key ideas that I see in the scriptures for why and how our faith integrates in the workplace. The first is that your work matters. That your work is good. That it is dignified to work. We have a dignity to who we are because work is actually good. Work is not actually part of the curse of Scripture. Second, your work matters because it is intrinsically valuable. Intrinsically valuable, not instrumentally valuable to another end, but in and of itself, your work is intrinsically valuable. And third, that your work is ministry as it aligns with God's mission. And though the church inadvertently and sometimes purposefully has communicated otherwise, there really is no such thing as, quote, professional ministry. We are all ministers. We'll see that in a few moments. So first, your work is good, and I invite you to turn to Genesis chapter 1 with me. And let us see why our work is good, why our work is dignified. We're going to be in Genesis 1, and then we also are going to be in the book of Colossians, briefly, in a couple different places, as well as a note into Isaiah. Genesis chapter 1. Our work is good. Why? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, the darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. I'm reading a very familiar passage, obviously, right? Genesis chapter 1. So do me a favor. Listen with me as I read it, and I listen to myself read it, through the lens of thinking about work, not about God creating the world, even though they're the same thing. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and then God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness night, and evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. Then God said, let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. And that is what happened. Jump to verse 9. Then God said, let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear. And that is what happened. Verse 14. Then God said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth. And that is what has happened. Verse 20. Then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and every other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 24. Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, every producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that is what happened. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They'll reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, and male and female, he created them. And at the end of verse 30, and that is what happened. And God looked over all that God had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. Chapter 2, verse 1. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work. Well, that's Genesis 1 and 2. And this thing called the curse hasn't happened yet, because that's Genesis 3. So work must be good. Because every time God created, i.e. did work, he called it good. How God did it exactly, I don't know. That God did it is what this passage points to. That God is a worker is what this passage points to. That we are made in the image of God, as verse 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30 point to in chapter 1, tells us that if work is good for God and we're made in the image of God and we do work, then our work is good. It is dignified. Friends, to be made in the image of God is to be made a worker. And so our work, your work, is dignified. Your work is dignified. Part of the original creation, reflection of the image of God. And reflected in Jesus too. Jesus spent 3 years doing his teaching, healing, driving out demon ministry stuff. Good technical word. What did Jesus do for 30 years before that, roughly? Well, he was a kid, right? And then he became a tweenager, then he became a teenager, and somewhere in there, probably in ancient Near East, probably much earlier than we would see this in our day today, he learned a trade. What was he called? A carpenter. Friends, Jesus spent 6 times more of his life doing carpentry than doing what we call professional ministry. Have you ever thought about that? Jesus worked as a carpenter. And then he moved into this other thing of like teaching and healing and such. God's work is God's mission active in the world, and we can say confidently that work is good because God worked, and so your work is good and my work is good because we reflect God's image. Second, your work in and of itself matters. It matters because it has intrinsic value, not instrumental value in God's mission. Instrumental value would mean I do my work so that I can get this done. And most often, very often, whether unintentionally again or very intentionally, in the church, we've made it sound like that. You do your work so you can witness to your friends at the water cooler. There's no water coolers anymore. You can witness to your friends at the end of the Zoom meeting before they log off. I don't know what you do now because Zoom's really affecting this in a negative way. But you work to evangelize, basically. That's the implication the church has given, frankly, at times, or intentionally said. And certainly, by all means, please share the love of Jesus with people at work, but that is not why your work has value. Your work in and of itself has value. It has intrinsic value because what we do is a form of participating again in God's work. Author Robert Banks of Faith Goes to Work offers these 6 areas of God's work that we in turn reflect and participate. And I want to ask you, as you think about your work, which of these 6 does your work fit into? Redemptive work. Anytime we do work that incorporates redemptive elements, like God is doing reconciling redemptive work, it's reflective of God's work here. So writers and musicians and actors who tell stories of redemption, to counselors and mediators and therapists who help redemption happen in the lives of people. Creation work, creating and fashioning things like we just read about God's work in Genesis 1. Artists, painters, architects, interior designers, carpenters, metal workers, plumbers, anyone who creates or contributes to creative work. Hey, don't pass that plumber thing I just said. We're all very thankful for the creativity of plumbing. Providential work, sustaining and maintaining your work, maintaining God's work to keep the universe alive. All who do work that helps sustain our lives as created beings reflects this work of God. From the utility worker to the person shelving food in the night at Kroger, to civil servants, to bus drivers, to IT specialists, the list goes on. These are sustaining aspects of our lives and therefore sustaining work, like God does. Justice work. God bringing justice to bear in the world. Lawyers, government officials, civic leaders, law enforcement, nonprofit workers in the area of justice. Compassionate work, comforting and healing and guiding. Therapists, doctors, teachers, educators, nurses, social workers, etc. Revelatory work, revealing truth about the world. Scientists, researchers, journalists. Where does your work fit in this list? Which aspect of God's work do you reflect and participate in? I'm confident that you do. And again, like I said last week, don't dismiss yourself if you are the president for human resources and talent development for your family with your children. Affectionately called stay-at-home moms or dads. You work too, because you keep humans alive. That's pretty important. Your work has intrinsic value because it reflects and participates in God's work. It's not just about instrumental value, but we want to see our work as how God sees it. It's actually demeaning as an image bearer to just think our work has instrumental value when we're reflecting how God worked in the world. Our work also has intrinsic value because whatever we do unto God. If you like, turn over to Colossians chapter 3 with me for these brief verses that speak to our work. In Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 22, Paul has been speaking to a number of ways that groups interact, or types of roles, interact with each other, wives and husbands, children and parents, and it's all within the context of him expressing words about our new life in Christ and moving towards the newness that Christ brings to our lives. And here, he's going to start with the word slaves in the NIV translation, but here I want you to understand this idea of slaves and masters is much more accurate to be towards work and supervisor or boss. Now, yes, there's a whole context related to slaves and masters here, and I will let you learn that at the 8 a.m. Colossians class in room 122 right over here for the next 3 more weeks. And are you teaching it, Brad? Yep. See, go be with Brad Miller and learn, because it will be great. I'm utterly confident of that. And so I'm guessing you're doing Colossians 3 in 2 weeks, right? Yes. See, there you go. So you want Colossians 3, go in 2 weeks, and you will learn more about what this is meaning here. But for the moment, look at verse 22, and think of it here related to work and boss or supervisor, as we say. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything you do. Workers, obey your supervisor in everything you do. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. Serve them sincerely because of your reverent fear of the Lord. Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving actually is Christ. Please them when you're not looking. Have integrity to your work. Work sincerely, willingly, not begrudgingly with complaint, because our work is ultimately done unto God as we reflect God. And finally, our work has intrinsic value because it has lasting value, not just temporal purpose. And this is intriguing to me. Our work creates culture. We don't just copy culture, condemn culture, consume culture, critique culture. We're meant to create culture. We are meant to be culture makers because God is a culture maker. Follow with me in this passage from Isaiah 60 on the screen. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you, the riches of the nations will come. It's Isaiah's prophetic word of restoration when the new heavens and the new earth will be moving towards consummation. That's part of the story that we talked about last week, where the heavens come down. And here, it's talking about Isaiah prophetically talking to God about what is going to come. Surely the islands look to me. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish, bringing your children from afar. With what? Their silver and their gold, to honor the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Your gates will always stand open, New Jerusalem. They will never be shut day or night, so that people may bring you the wealth, note this phrase, the wealth of the nations, their kings led in triumphal procession. I will make peace your governor, well-being your ruler. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders. You will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. Isaiah here speaks of the wealth of the nations being brought into the holy city, led by the kings of the nations in triumphal procession. It's a foreshadowing of what will be in the new heavens and the new earth. And in it, in the holy city, because it's renewed out of this earth, and what is already here, so as has been said many times over the decades, or actually over the centuries, go plant a tree. The reality of life will be a renewed creation, not void of what we have done, but rather filled with what we have done. Not void of what we have done, but rather filled with what we have done. One theologian explains it this way: when the kings come marching in, then, they bring the best of the nations. Even cultural goods that had been originally deployed against God and his people. The final vision of the city is one filled not just with God's glory and presence, not just with God's own stunningly beautiful architectural designs, not just with redeemed, reconciled persons from every cultural background, but with redeemed human culture too. And when we speak of culture, we're speaking of cultural artifacts, things that are made. We're speaking of the way we do things in culture. So as has been said, a fascinating exercise then is to ask about any aspect of our culture, and be it the way we do something or an artifact we've made, and ask ourselves this: can we imagine this making it into the New Jerusalem? Friends, what this passage is pointing to is what we do here today. Something of this is going to be in the fully purified, redeemed form one day in the New Jerusalem. What we make. So, for example, will the worship songs we sang earlier, will any of them make it into the New Jerusalem, or we'll still sing them? If not those, or maybe along with those, surely Handel's Messiah is going to make it, or Vivaldi's Four Seasons. What about the decor in the foyer, the art that's there? If not that, or along with that, I certainly hope Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal painting is going to be there. I'm pretty confident it is. Clearly, Tolkien's writings will be there. We all know that. And I'm quite confident my wife's chocolate chip cookies deserve to be there. And even better, because it'll be the redeemed, holy, purified version of those cookies, so I can eat as many as I want and I won't be unhealthy. It's a fascinating exercise, friends, but it's also serious. The ships of Tarshish with the kings leading in triumphal procession. Friends, this is not figurative. This is not. Our work lasts. Well, that makes me think about how I'm doing my work. Am I doing a good job? Any shot it's going to last? Now, maybe my work's not going to last, but I like the idea of thinking of, does it have a shot at lasting? Like, am I doing good enough work here? No, that's not a pressure. That's not legalism. That's not meant to be guilt. Don't take that stuff. Leave it at the door, please. I'll try to. It's about the invitation to participate in co-creating with God because we bear God's image. Your work has intrinsic value because it has lasting value. So our work is good and dignified. Our work has intrinsic value because it matters. Those truths about our work are enough for us to see that our work is meaningful, but there's even more. When we take that work and we see its alignment with God's mission in the world, then we come to recognize that it's not only good and dignified, it's not only intrinsically valuable, but it is also ministry. Ministry every bit as important in God's eyes as the ministry of a missionary or a pastor or whoever else we have elevated to a higher status in God's eyes based on what they do. Your work is ministry as it aligns with God's mission in the world. Work was inherently part of God's mission from the start, and so when we think of the idea of ministry, a working definition for that being the work and service of a Christian, if ministry is the work and service of a Christian, then our work is ministry as it aligns with God's mission. Now, why that phrase, aligning with God's mission? Because just to be clear, if what you do is aligning with the mission of the evil systems and forces as described in Ephesians chapter 6, then clearly that's not ministry as spiritual work and service. I'm not calling anything we do ministry. I mean, if your work leads you to exploit the poor and enhance injustice and oppression towards the marginalized or even towards the creation by your work being a consumer of creation rather than a steward of creation, that's not ministry because that's not aligned with God's mission. Or if your work takes advantage of people for dishonest gain, like in some way you're going to get gain from others just for yourself, then even something that should be ministry and can be ministry, it's not if it's not aligned with God's mission in that way of love. So how might I know if my work is aligned with God's mission? Well, let's just remember, what is God's mission? As I said last week, in a word, God's mission is love, the giving and receiving of sharing love. As St. John of the Cross says it, it's putting love where love is not. And God's specific mission of love right now in this world is the reconciliation and restoration of all things as the sent people of God. So let's look at Colossians chapter 1. Turn over there if you were with me in Colossians chapter 3. Let's look at Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15. And these beautiful, powerful, poignant verses that are some form of early Christian hymn that Paul captures here in his writing. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. Christ existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through Christ, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on the earth. God made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones and kingdoms and rulers and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. Christ is also the head of the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is the first in everything. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ. And through him, God reconciled everything, all things to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. Theologically, we can understand our work as aligning with God's mission, yes, if it's putting God's love where love is not, but also if it is work enhancing this focused mission of reconciliation. And so you might even think of it as, how does your work fit into God's reconciling work in the world right now? The 5 different ways that God is reconciling in this world right now, a la Colossians chapter 1, the reconciliation of God with creation. Does your work participate in that? The care and stewarding of creation and the resources to keep it from decay. The reconciliation of God with created beings, evidencing God's kingdom by guiding people to spiritually awaken to the reality in their lives, of God in their lives, to God's redemption, helping them to experience an end to their feeling separation from God. So reconciliation of God with creation first, reconciliation of God with created beings second, reconciliation between created beings. This is what's also happening in Colossians chapter 1's expression. Human to human, loving your neighbor. The evidences of God's kingdom of peace and reconciliation, the ending of all of our isms of racism and classism and sexism, taking action to end discrimination, oppression, injustice, especially to the poor, the oppressed, the vulnerable, the marginalized, working to bring peace, as well as the reconciliation between created beings when we have community, when people are brought into relationships with each other, ending isolation. Fourth, reconciliation within created beings, that we are reconciled to ourselves. There's a reconciliation, friends, that needs to take place where we choose to actually love ourselves. Loving yourself is actually holy, friends. One of the most subversive statements of Jesus is love your neighbor as yourself. If we loved our neighbors the way we normally love ourselves, with the guilt and shame we often heap on ourselves, we'd have no friends, and we'd have no neighbors because they'd all move away. Because we don't love ourselves well most of the time when we're really honest. So it is right to love ourselves. Well, that's reconciliation within ourselves, that we're reconciled to ourselves with the reality of a right assessment of who we are, which is humility, that says, I'm the beloved of God, I'm an image bearer of God, I'm a masterpiece of God, and yes, I struggle with this thing called sin where I disobey God and I want to go out on my own and I want to find unconditional love where it can't be found, so I deal with idolatry. And God loves me anyway, and I'm always in union with God if I will awaken to it. And when we do work that contributes to reconciliation with created beings, then we contribute to healing for people in their body, mind, soul, and spirit. And finally, the reconciliation between the created beings and the creation. Because we are at enmity with the creation, even though we don't want to be. And so once again, caring for the created order. So you might ask, where is your work contributing to God's mission of love, God's mission of loving reconciliation in one of these areas? This is what we precisely ask and implicate our fellows into for their consideration in the fellowship program that I lead with Circle City Fellows. We do this specifically in the spring of our program because we ask them to do a professional development project where they consider, what's a problem or pain point or area of challenge or brokenness in my work, and what does God have to say about it? Where does it fit into God's reconciling work? Where is God's reconciling work needed in this area? And what can I do about it for a few months? And so over the last 2 years, we've seen projects in all of these areas. The reconciliation of creation with one of our fellows doing a project towards changing to sustainable packaging at the soup kitchen at her church. To another fellow who launched his nonprofit and now for-profit land development organizations and companies whose core value is to steward the land and the creation and the resources of the land in the image of God, to reconcile the land to God and reconcile the land and its care to human beings. Reconciliation with God, awakening to God with another of our fellows, changing his process in financial planning to help his clients understand their deepest desires with the belief that they ultimately will be moved towards God. As Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. And a second fellow using art and her profession to draw individuals toward God in healing relationship. Reconciliation between created beings. We've seen numerous projects in this area highlighting justice. One of our fellows shifting her project in the moment of COVID to feed a school, a whole school. The families of the whole school were getting no food during COVID. In a lower income area where they were getting free breakfast and free lunch every day. And she shifted her project to help meet that need so that that school was fed by a foundation locally. Another fellow doing HR training to help individuals get jobs of lower income and marginalized circumstance. Another fellow creating an opportunity for business entrepreneurs working on their own, who are self-employed, to have community with one another rather than competition, because she, as a self-employed entrepreneur, was experiencing that loneliness. And another fellow who's a lawyer, teaching doctors how to explain a patient's disability in a way that the law understands so that those clients of hers who genuinely deserve their disability benefits would actually get them rather than being instantaneously denied, which is what normally happens in the system right now, because doctors just don't know that the way they write the disability doesn't match the way the lawyers and the judges read it. And so she's translating it. And this past summer, she had the opportunity to present to physicians of Eskenazi. If you're not familiar with Eskenazi, it is our catch-all hospital system for Indianapolis. There's a lot of disability situations at Eskenazi just by the nature of their clients. And her project is translating it so that people who have suffered under oppression and injustice have the opportunity to get the disability benefits they deserve. And I'd be lying if I don't tell you that I'm not incredibly proud of that young lady. That is work as ministry, and it has nothing to do with this stage of singing a song or preaching a sermon. Now I got to stop. And then reconciliation within created beings. Another of our fellows training his patients as a doctor to take control with their health, to actually understand how they can be in charge of their health by frankly just teaching these people who struggle with the system, the online system that the hospital network has created. They just don't understand it. So he's creating basically a cheat sheet so they can actually understand it, so they can take charge of their health. Because these are some people who don't have internet access all the time, don't always have cell service for themselves, and just also don't have English as their first language. And what they do in their projects and beyond is what I believe we are invited to do in our work. Can you think of something in your work that is not aligning with God's vision for the world? Is there a pain point, an area of brokenness, a challenge point in your workplace, something that's not honoring God in your work in some way? Does God care about it? Does it fit the list where loving reconciliation of God wants to step in? Is there something you could do, just even one simple step? We tell our fellows all the time, you're not trying to change the whole thing. Just take a step. Just take a step towards it. You don't know where it's going to go. One of my colleagues in Denver, who does a similar program to us, had a fellow who took that one step to work on family leave and grief and bereavement leave, because his company basically had none when he went through a time of deep grief and deep bereavement. And so he took a step to change it. It was just a step one. See, could he change something within his location, his spot in Colorado? It worked its way all the way up to the national headquarters, and it changed the whole bereavement policy for the whole company across the whole nation. And friends, people deserve to have bereavement as part of their benefit as a worker and not have to take PTO for it and get paid for it. Your work is good. It is dignified. Your work matters because it has intrinsic lasting value. Your work is meaningful to God. And your work is ministry as it aligns with God's mission. Do you see it? That's my invitation to you. See your work as God sees it, so that you engage your work with the passion and purpose to which God has called you. Let's pray together. God, thank you for the privilege of doing work. The privilege of doing work. We get to work with you. We get to reflect your image in what we do. Thank you for that. Thank you for the gift of participating with you in that, but thank you for the gift of your Spirit that empowers it, that makes it happen in us. And so, Father, I pray for myself and my work every day, for each person here in this room in their work every day, including the church staff. Doing a spreadsheet and a database related to children's ministry doesn't feel like ministry most of the time for Terry McVeigh, but it is ministry because it's sustaining work. All of us, God, in our work, would you help us to see how it is dignified? The reasons that it has such value, the way it reflects you, and how it is ministry on your behalf as your servants. Would you fill us with your Spirit? Spirit, come to us in a way that reshapes, reforms, and re-envisions, where we spend the bulk of our time every day to see it for what I believe your scriptures are saying that it is. That we might engage this work with passion and purpose